It's going. It's going. Okay, so what I meant was that, yeah, we rush it and we go into the rendering too fast. We miss out on an opportunity to add lots of details. So what do I mean by details? Well, I already had that drawing, didn't I? Where is it? In my notes. So I already had the drawing down here. Let's just go down to it. Yeah, that was my initial idea. And what that thumbnail did is it just helped me place objects. Like I knew that there was a circle that was kind of the focal area. That was the area of the eye. I wanted my story to end at that circle in the center. And I knew that I kind of had this weird kind of path shape, was kind of cut into it. But then I'd also, in the way my brain was working at the time, I was thinking about it being big, but indoors, but I hadn't really drawn that in. These were all just ideas. Now, when we blow that up from a thumbnail, which is that, you know, small and hideous and rough, into something a little bit bigger like this is where the intelligence of ideas start to come in. Let's just take away my first notes layer to get rid of the weird witch silhouette. So what do we mean by ideas? What's actually changed? Well, first off, it's just a chance to draw it bigger. There's that side to it. Just by making it larger, you give yourself more room to breathe creatively with what you can do. But then you can start to add more details, and you can start to actually explore your own idea. As opposed to just drawing it, actually think about how to give it more depth or more purpose. So even in this is still a rough. This is not even close to a rendered, not even close to a clean drawing at this stage. But already I think I've started to think about things I can add. So for starters, I've actually kind of put these kind of really tall, almost like sewer system arches, like concrete arches, into the distant background. And though it doesn't translate particularly well here, I've said to myself, they are a fair distance away, like on a depth, on Z-axis, away from this central point here. That's a definite. That's definitely going to happen. The next thing I've done is I was starting to think about, well, I need to kind of give them, what's the point of having an empty circle? It doesn't make any sense. Like, what, they just walk into the circle? No, I need to put something there. So I started to map in the idea of like an object floating. I'm still undecided whether it's a person or a carcass. It was a person, then it was a carcass, then it was a person. It's like, you know what, it's something. There's something that's going to be kind of suspended in midair. And then I started to put these markers in. And these just represent scale changes. So they're helping my brain work out like depth. How far is that? Like, is this 10 steps to the top, or is this 300 meters? Yeah, and just putting in scale markers of like, this is a person, this is a person, this is a person, it's helping my brain work out, like when I paint this and I start thinking about light and the way that light moves across a shape, I'll have a better understanding of roughly how much distance I've got to travel with that light. Then I started thinking, well, what about vertical shapes? I've got this big cone and I've got a circle, but you know what? It doesn't feel weird. And for me, when I think about witches, there's something by design kind of unnatural about the concept of witchcraft and that kind of supernatural kind of thinking. It's unnatural. It's uncomfortable. It should be strange. So I thought, well, what can I do to make this feel strange? Which is where these lines came in. I don't even know what they are at this point. I might just make them like pillars. Or they could be pillars, they could be swords. I don't know at this stage. They could be flags, like banners. But what's important is that they move on different angles to the other shapes. So I'm putting in things that just stand out and feel a bit odd. Then I was thinking, well, if I've got a big circle, it seems odd that a shape only exists once in a composition. That's quite unnatural, actually. It should exist multiple times. Why aren't there smaller circles elsewhere? There needs to be a multiple of that shape. So then I was thinking, well, what if I put like these kind of holes? I was thinking, so I just started dotting a few around, a few up here, one here, down here. I was thinking, the idea was that what if, it's windy, what if this hill was hollow, was porous? You know, what if these were holes that actually kind of made it feel more like honeycomb and less like rock? And again, that's a bit weird. No one's ever seen honeycomb that big before, or you know, it's not a natural landscape. So it will build the discomfort of the composition. All of these ideas, whether they're good or bad, and I don't even know yet because we're still thinking about the design process, we're still rounding it out. But we won't know if they're good or bad until we start to kind of really explore them. But what's important is none of them exist in the thumbnail. The thumbnail was just composition and placement. Now we're actually generating the theme and the meaning and the purpose of that work. Okay, and that's what we're going to do. Now, when we come back, we're going to do a quick exercise that some of you might have done actually. If I'm honest, I'm hoping that you have done this. We're going to do it again anyway, which is we're going to do a sphere sketch. So I'm going to show you, has anyone done this where you just study light by painting a sphere? Yeah, a couple of people have done it. Yeah, we're going to do that. It's a great refresher on how light works. We're going to do a bit of an explanation into the science of light and how we're supposed to process light. And then the second half of the session, so from 3:45 until 4:45, is all about applying light into this. Okay? So you've got 8 minutes. If you need to go and get a drink, use the bathroom, whatever you need to do, you've got 8 minutes to do it. And then we'll come back and we're going to do a light study. So we can just look at the science of light and then we can start painting some depth into our images. Okay? So yeah, if you need to go now. Or just breathe cool air because there's free stuff in here. I'm going to leave the stream running. Okay, so we'll be back in, like 5 minutes.
I know. Basically, as soon as we get the ideas, like
Wait, why did you stay up till 4? What? Why did you stay up till 4 a.m.? I know, when you come back. Indulge me when you come back. I wanted to wait till the I mean, I thought you were pretty good at 3D modeling.
Hey, I'm Brian. I'm in trouble with this mold. All right, get out. There you go. Make this move, and then you sits down. Does it? Does it in 10 minutes? Oh yeah, you're right. Helps you fine.
Yeah.
I mean, that is helpful. When you ask for this, but it says like get out. Right?
It's a bit too far.
Does it? Okay, done.
Yeah, I know.
PG.
You done that for me. Well, I mean, actually, no, you did show me a little bit. Do you remember how you get started off with the thing with the threshold? Where you got to grab and beat the trunk with it. Is that right away, bro? Why is that? You know what? That's not right.
Yes.
To do with the beat.
Yes, I remember. It's the song.
Oh, no.
Like you change your mode or whatever it was, and then you click the PC, and then whatever is basically all the other ones around it, and you literally make it go down depending on what you want. It's really useful, but it's also really annoying if you leave it on. It just ruins it.
Yeah.
Oh, I've been doing that too. This is the small one. I feel like
It's good.
yeah, that's what I thought. Welcome to the big room.
That's not the one you got, that's basically
So yeah, here's the software. But yeah, this one's like I think this game with Drawing is so funny. I feel like this is so hard. Like it's so much easier to get it just but this is not there's not much you can do. Because you're literally just making basically one block for this. Right? One block, like a couple of blocks, whatever the kind of schedule is. Like there's not much you can really do. You can definitely animate this stuff. Just the
For what? I just drew a mountain project.
I've been thinking about this one. Well, you know what? Big and then we got which is basically it's like if Dracula is more boring and one level and yeah, but then we also we also gave students all like I know, but the problem is
Because I don't, I'm not gonna dance with you, I'm just gonna save this.
You know what? You're not coming back. Yeah, so you're gonna just say that.
Yeah, I just saved it. You didn't beat me.
Because last time
Yeah, like he has an ostrich.
and the back.
I'm gonna do that.
I mean, you've done it.
Because right now I don't say anything.
You're gonna save him. You're gonna save him.
Yeah, I'm saying in case we need to use it.
I'm doing it now. I do it now. Well, you do it. I think that's the skill itself.
I would like to do that. Yeah, 3D model the whole level and then 3D.
I know. It's gonna make the whole you can have those views.
Yeah, like the way I'm thinking about it right now is the environment's going to be and then this is where this
See me, I just like trying.
then you just have to look the design already came up with the texture. Because if the city already gave was 40%, you just put the textures into the other designs. Actually,
You say it might be.
yeah, I forgot.
Right, folks, 1 minute. We're going to get started again. Make sure you've saved your work.
Oh, I just thought of like and it's like 3D I really like
No, not yet. Not yet.
Are you making that mine as a rookie? I feel like I'm so exactly the way you are.
Okay, folks, everyone take a seat. Can you save your work? And then I'd like you to open a new file. We're going to come back to this one, so don't close that one. But we're going to open a new one. These are the settings. It's 2000 by 2000, 72. Background is that same 50%, okay? So it's just slightly smaller. The reason it's smaller is I want you to just minimize any slowdown. I don't want you to get any lag while we're doing this, just to make it nice and simple. 2000 by 2000 at 72 pixels per inch. RGB color, 50% black background. So it's that gray background. So it looks like this. And then we'll start by getting a soft, round brush. Just going to make sure the brush is adequate for the job. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so what we're going to do is I want to talk to you just a little while. I'm going to try and minimize the talking as much as I can before getting you to actually do it. But I want to just go through kind of the science of the way light works, because if you don't know how it works, you won't ever be able to paint it well. Okay, it just won't work. It will always look just a little bit off, a little bit kind of wrong. And the reason that it looks wrong is because it does quite literally have a science There is a physics to the way light works, and you need to understand that. So the first thing you need to understand is that when we talk about light, there are different kinds of light, and that different lights behave in different ways. So, for example, the sun, there you go, the sun. The sun is up there, out there, should I say, out there, and it fires light in all directions. And we catch some of that light, hence daylight. But one of the important things to remember is the way that light reaches us is not the same as any other light that originates inside our atmosphere. So if this is the ground down here, as light moves downwards, the way it reaches us is a lot of people assume that it kind of reaches us like this, because it's firing in all directions. But when it makes contact with us, or here on Earth, it's like that. And it's absolutely not. Okay, that is not the way light behaves from our sun. Light behaves in what's commonly called an omnidirectional manner. So that means that if this is the ground, okay, light rays move effectively in parallel to one another. That is because the sun is massive and we are not. All right, that's all it is. So when light reaches us, light rays themselves move almost in parallel. They do not spread. If the light is coming from a flashlight, yes, the light rays spread. Okay, they do move at an angle. All right, so that's the first thing to remember. Different lights behave in different ways, and the width of that lens, okay, defines how wide the spread of light is. So if you've got a light source that's got a very tall, very narrow lens, then the way it spreads will be quite narrow. If you've got a very shallow light, so the actual light source is here, it's going to come out at a much wider angle and hit a greater number of objects. So that's the first thing to remember. The next thing we need to talk about is reflection, diffusion, and occlusion, and what these things are. So let me just zoom backwards and clear this up a little bit. So let's put our sun back there. Actually, let's do perfectly smooth and then perfectly rough. It's probably the best way to do it. So there's our floor, our surface. If our surface is completely smooth, okay, absolutely smooth, what happens is when the light hits that, it bounces straight up. Okay? The next ray, remember that they are parallel to one another. Hits that, straight up. Okay? This creates a smooth reflection, down, up. No diffusion across the surface. What that means is that the edge of that light is quite sharp. All right? The best way to think about this is, however, the reason we have smooth objects, because there's not actually any such thing as a smooth surface. It doesn't exist. Okay, in science, there's no such thing as a smooth surface. The reason some surfaces are smoother than others is because their particles are closer together. They are tightly packed. Okay, objects with broken surfaces are because the particles are not packed together in a uniform manner and are misshapen and exist in different kind of clusters, and that causes a rough surface. So water is a good example of, even though water is a liquid and is able to move, it's actually quite densely packed. It just happens to have a lot of space between it. It's uniform packing. So it creates a smooth surface that creates quite a nice reflection. Okay, nice clean reflection. Okay, glass is another one. It's technically a liquid, but it also, the way that the particles are put together, they're quite uniform in their space apart, creates a smooth surface, and light bounces straight off of it. If it is a rough surface, going all the way back, like that. What happens is when the light travels down, so let's go for this one goes down here, it's going to hit that point. Okay, it's going straight back up that way. The next one, in parallel, it's going to hit that point. It's going in a slightly, actually that's the wrong angle. Should look down. It's actually going to go that way. And then that way, straight back up. Here. It's going to clip that way. And go up that way. Can you see how these are now moving all in completely different directions? That uniformity is lost. That they will bounce almost at completely different angles. So there, it's going to glance up that way. And it's going to shoot back that way. Okay, so when a surface is unevenly shaped or heavily textured, so it's a rough surface, light doesn't all bounce in a parallel, uniform manner. Now what that does is it means that when we look at those surfaces, what we see is because the light's traveling in so many different directions, as it moves further from its initial source point, it diffuses across the surface. Now in terms of the way we see that light, that is the difference between a light that looks like that, well, let's make it a bit larger. Yeah, a light that looks like that, and a light that looks like that. Okay, the first one is a reflection that is sharp and uniform because it's smooth. The second is a reflection that has diffused across the surface and blurred out. Okay, so reflection and diffusion. So when we're painting light, we need to think about that. Like, what am I know I'm painting light bits and dark bits and medium bits, but also what is the material? What am I painting this on? Because if I'm painting this on wood, it's going to behave extremely differently to if I were painting this light onto glass or onto water or onto plastic. Yes, smooth surfaces. So that's the first thing to consider. The next thing to consider is the idea of occlusion. So let's get rid of that. Add another one. The way occlusion works let's pick the right pen. Go. So not a rough surface, but a surface with a significant or a clear indentation. Okay, a marked indentation. The light travels down. So let's say the light is going, let's put it at an angle again. Let's say it's going here, 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 here. Now, believe it or not, even though that coverage looks really good, there is one specific part just here where the light's not touching. Okay? That area is not getting hit by light, only by the reflection of light. And all light reflects, even on, like, regardless of surface, all light reflects. Okay? But that area is a patch where the light is not hitting directly in any way. That's our occlusion area. Now, the best way to know when an occlusion area occurs is based on the depth of an indentation. The deeper an indentation, the more likely that there is to be occlusion. To see it in real life, I mean, just hold your hand up. You look at your hand. Push your fingers together. See that dark patch between your fingers, that line? That's occlusion. That's your occlusion area. No light is getting into that tiny gap, and that's why your eyes can see a dark line. Yeah, that's how you know that you've got 4 fingers and not just one giant one. You all thought about it. I did too. So imagine just a giant. Okay, right. So that's the difference. Yeah, that's your occlusion area. So think about it. If you're painting light and you've got this really deep crevice in the surface, there has to be an occlusion area there. There has to be a line of some kind to show that light just cannot reach that space. Okay. So with all that in mind, what I'd like you to do now is actually attempt to paint a ball spherically. So there's our sun. You can follow along with this, so follow me as I kind of do it. So I'm going to create a new layer. On that new layer, I'm going to go and get my circle, my ellipse tool, I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to draw myself a sphere. Actually, you know what? No, I'm not. I'm going to do it with the marquee tool. I'm going to do it with the elliptical marquee tool. Let's do it that way. So the elliptical marquee tool is up here. Second tool down. Just click and hold to find the elliptical marquee tool. And I'm going to put my sphere in around there. The reason I thought we'd do it this way because it just creates a clean edge. It's like a mask, effectively. It just allows us to stay inside this line. So there's our elliptical tool. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to find the kind of the core shadow. So the core shadow is the point at which we are not in necessarily the darkest point. So we're not in an occlusion area, but we're in an area where the light is not directly hitting, but there is reflection. So if we think about this, we know that the light is up here. We know that it's going to move in a specific way. Yeah, so it's omni. It's going to all come down in the same way. So what I'd like you to do, get your brush tool. I don't know where I've got the properties up. Let's close that group. I'm going to go for this, like a soft, round pressure opacity. No, I'm not. Yeah, it's pressure opacity. I'm going to make it quite large. So I'm going to just increase the size of the tool a little bit. We'll take it up to a bit bigger, actually. Probably to about 1,000, maybe just under, yeah, 1,400, I've got it there. I'm going to make sure it's really soft, so my hardness is at 0. You can do your, what is it up here? Smoothing options. I do it by holding down Control and Alt and then clicking and dragging. Yes, you can change your hardness that way. Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to go up to my color in the top right hand corner. I'm going to go to a grayscale slider, which is just this slider. So we know 50%, that's the actual color of the background. So it can't be 50%. So we're going to take it down to about take it up, to about 70 odd %. And then what I want to do is I'm starting on the bottom of the circle. I'm just kind of bringing in that core shadow. So I'm thinking, where does the light not hit? Remember, we're dealing with sphere here, so it's gonna kind of imprint in a spherical line. You're not going to get a straight line across. Okay, so what I mean by that is you're not going to get a line that cuts across. It's going to be spherical. It's going to have a curvature to it. Okay, so just bear that in mind. Okay, so I'm just going to, just bring that to about, I'm going to go up a bit further. I'm going to go to about 78. I'm just bringing it down. So I'm just starting to think about, like, where is the light absolutely kind of not hitting? Okay. Now, if my ball was the same color as my background, yes, the same value at 50%, if the light's hitting it, what's the light going to do to the ball? It's going to lift, where it makes contact, it's going to lift that value slightly higher. So if I go to 50, and I just creep up to about 44, 45, and then on this side, just pressuring just slightly lighter value. Not a lot, just a little bit. And go back to 50%, kind of smooth it out in the middle where I can. Back up to 78. So I'm just kind of painting in, just trying to keep it as sensible as possible. Go. We go right up to about, we go up to about 20, go to about 20%, and then I'm going to make my brush a bit smaller. And then at that exact point where contact is made, I can put in that apex. So the apex is that point where the light is like straight down. It's not glancing off at an angle. Okay, so if you, I don't want to kind of get a bit weird with it, but the best way I think about it is if the light starts up here. So let's go to white. My machine's having a bit of a breakdown at the moment. it's not going to let me do it on that one. So what I mean by that is the light's coming straight down and then bouncing straight back up. So it's reflecting like straight back at its origin point, which is where you're going to get that apex of light. The next thing we need to do is think about that occlusion. So we said, you know, it's that point, that crevice where light's not even able to reflect. So that's going to be down here. So I'm going to go down to, go up to about 90. I mean, at a push, it would be 90. But I can't imagine it ever being any higher than that. And then very gently, right at the very, very bottom, I'm just putting in the tiniest little bit. I might make it a bit smaller, actually. Just go down a bit. Go back. Okay. So I think we started with the ball. The sphere was going to be its natural state is at 50% because we just made a marquee shape. The darker area where the light is not hitting, we drew it down into the 70s, then into the 80s, and then the occlusion point, which is down here, is at the 90s. And then at the apex of the light, we just added that tiny little highlight. The smoother the object, the less occlusion there would be. So if I went for like maybe that opacity and flow, actually, maybe that will work. If I go to make that a little bit smaller, take the hardness to about 80 odd. Whoa. Let's go up here, take that to about 15. Painting in just the tiniest detail like that, of just that little like clear bit of reflection, smooth reflection, implies that the object is smooth. Yeah, which is not necessarily what we want. Okay, we're going to keep this one fairly rough because we want a half decent amount of occlusion on it. Okay, so if you're ever not sure, if you feel like you might have maybe overdone it a little bit, go back to the 50. So I'm going to go to that pressure opacity, back to 50%, because 50% is what is the actual local kind of value. Yeah, and you can just smooth it out with that 50%. We said 78, aren't we, is where we were for this side. 78. And then we said when we got up to that, you know, the occlusion, we went all the way to 90. Kind of made that patch darker, and then we went out to about 30, I think. And just there, just in that little area there, we're trying to really bring it out. Because what you want is you want it to look like it's not hitting on the edge. You want it to hit on the surface. Make it a little bit smaller, actually. It's like that. The next thing we need to add, and this is where it does start to get slightly detailed, is when light hits, when light makes contact, it doesn't just absorb into a surface. It doesn't just hit the surface of an object and then soak into that surface. It reflects. So if we imagine that this is on a surface, if this ball is sitting on a table, it would have a reflection. So down here, we go back up to about ever so slightly up, so maybe 58 to 60, and then just on the edge, and I might make it a little bit harder here, so just so it catches a little bit better. So just on that edge, you would see just the slightest bit of reflection. Not on the occlusion, it wouldn't be down the bottom on the occlusion, it would just be kind of up that edge. Because just where the light comes down, it hits the table and it bounces back up. You just get a very gentle kind of occlusion. I'm going to go back and just make sure I get this nice and dark at the bottom there. There we go. So what you should have, just to be really clear about this, to make sure that you're not making it feel flat, you want it to feel three-dimensional, is think about the surface of an object. Okay? Just because we put our light source up here doesn't mean they exist on the same z-axis. Alright? The z-axis might be completely different. You know, so for example, if I'm just going to do this very, very quickly just to show you what I mean by the difference in z-axis. So we've gone back, there's our basic shape again. Well, what if this is further forward? You know, just because it's up there doesn't mean it's flat. So if I go down to, what did we say, 78 we were at, weren't we? So, and then I'll make it bigger, not as hard. You know, it's entirely possible that it's actually in front and not behind. And if that's true, that position of that highlight area would be completely different. Okay, now it's going to look more like this. It's still going to have all the same components. Bit too much there. Yeah, it's still going to have the same components. It's just the position is slightly different. Let's take that down. We never go all the way to white. We never go all the way to black. Okay, because that implies an absolute, complete absence of light. Or the absolute saturation of light, and those are just not accurate things. So now what I'm doing, I'm putting this in much, much smaller. And then the reflection is going to be a little bit higher as well, so I'm going to come up to about 40. Make this a bit bigger. And just very gently kind of get that around that edge. Around that edge as well, not too much, just a little bit. There you go. So now that shape, that's still accurate, but instead of the light being on the same z-axis, the light is now slightly in front. Yeah, it's shining towards the object. And this is the way you need to start thinking, is you don't think about when you draw like this. I know we just drew the sun as like a white blob. Yes, that's where it is on an x-y axis. Yeah, like how far up or down or how far left or right. But what about its z-axis? Is it behind the shape? Is it in front of the shape? You know, if it's, I'll do one more example and then we're going to go and start painting light into our subjects. It is almost 4 o'clock. I'm just going to make that invisible, do another layer again. This time, what if it's all the way behind? Well, it might look something a little bit more complex. I'm going to take that to 76, that'll do. Yeah, if it's all the way behind, it's going to look like this, where you're going to get far darker patches, kind of dominate more of the space, but then the lighter patches are going to be really strong on that outside edge. It's going to cut through more like that. You're still going to get that occlusion, that's still going to be there. But it's just going to creep a little bit further. Okay, still accurate, it's just this sphere, the sun's way back on the z-axis, much, much further back. So have a think about it, you know, what, when we're designing light and when you're starting to paint light into your subjects, let's turn that marquee off just for safety. You know, which one is it? Yeah? Is it in front? Is it behind? Is it in line with it? So that one's in front. That one's behind. That one's in line. There you go. Okay? And those are relatively smooth objects. All right? If they're rough objects, they're going to behave differently. When I learned about light in terms of painting, I had a kind of overly simplistic technique I used to use, but I actually found it quite effective, and it might work for you. Which is what I would do is when I'm painting an object and I'm starting to think about light, I would actually draw the light in as a three-dimensional shape. So I would, yeah, it's dark enough. Let's make this a little bit smaller. I would quite literally like sketch in like a shape like that and just say, look, it's perfectly flat, or I'd make it really extreme and be like, no, this one's like, you know, like it's coming straight towards me, or if the light's going that way, I do these like weird little arrow shapes just to help myself understand that the light is kind of going in that direction. Yeah, it's going this way or it's going that way. So I draw like these weird little shapes just to help me remember it's not flat, it's three-dimensional. Yeah, it actually has space, and space is a key component. So with all that in mind, what we now need to do is go back to this and start thinking about, all right, I know what's in it. I know my subject matter, roughly. I'm not using research. I'm just pulling out my own kind of knowledge. And now I need to think about, where is the light? For starters, that's your first challenge, is you need to make some very clear decisions about where the light is located. Now, it's not going to be a sun. Well, it might be, but chances are it's not going to be the sun. All right, there's going to be multiple light sources. I'll mark mine now. I can tell you right now where my light is going to be, because I can kind of see it in my head a little bit. Let's go HFB sliders. So I quite like the idea of light kind of being along the way. So I'm probably going to have like some kind of warm lights positioned around here. Okay. And then here, I'm actually going to do something. I want to do a light coming from this space, but I don't want it coming spherically out like the sun. So I think I'm going to light it like from below. So almost like there's kind of light kind of coming up into the center of that like circle, into the center of that ring. So I'm going to have light there. And then the way that that's going to work is I'm thinking so this is going to be, these are going to be warm lights. So these ones down the bottom here will be oranges and reds, like torches of some kind. But I want this one to feel unnatural. Yeah, it's witches, isn't it? Like I want it to feel different. So I'm going to go with a blue. I'm going to go with like almost like gaslight. That kind of color in here, just because it will stand out and it will make the image stand out. And then what I'm going to do to complement that is the brickwork in the background. I'm going to go for that grey, bluey, greeny kind of sewer color, like kind of just really kind of water-soaked brickwork. And hopefully that's going to complement it. So what that's going to do though, is if the light is really low, it means that these archways in the background will be the opposite way round to the way they would traditionally be lit. Normally, if the light is above and you've got an archway, the shadow's up the top. But I'm working the other way around because my light's coming from below. So the top of my archways are going to be lit, and the lower down they go, so the lower down this way they go, the darker they're going to get. So it's going to be very bright, not bright, but brighter at the top, darker at the bottom. Okay? And it's going to be brighter in the mid-ground, the apex here, and it's going to get darker as it goes out this way, like this way. And then one thing I'm going to then do is I'll make a decision after that about how I light this character that's standing here. All right, I might light them with the blue light, so that very gentle. It's quite far away, so it'll be quite soft blue light that will light them. Or I could give them a torch and give them a really strong warm light, but I'm not sure yet. All right, I really don't know. What matters at this point in time is that I'm thinking about light to dark. All right, and that is where these things at the top come in. So let's just zoom out a little bit. These markers at the top, the Munsell value scale. This is my friend. All right, this is the starting point for understanding how to put light into place. So I'm going to get rid of my guide layers. Let's minimize that. I'm just going to call this light. It's just going to be a rough, this one. This is just going to help me understand roughly where everything's going. I'm going to put it behind, oops, I'm not going to put it in the notes. I'm going to put it above the notes. There we go. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because anything I now draw, I want to appear like behind the sketch. So I'm referencing the sketch. And what I'm going to do, going to go in, I'm going to hold down the I key, and that brings up the eyedropper. And I need to kind of decide, well, what's the base light level? Like, what's the kind of the standard light level for this environment? Is it a naturally bright environment, or is it a naturally dark environment? If this is my 50% just here, to me, it makes sense to go down one. I'm indoors, so it would naturally make sense to eyedropper that darker value. Now, everyone's got a different technique here. Everyone works slightly different ways. I personally, my preference is to actually like paint this stuff in. So I like to go in and actually like paint in the whole area. So if that's my base value, that's really what should be going into this space here. I knew it was going to do this because I'm working on multiple screens. So I'm just going to wait for the computer to play catch up. So I'm just going to go, what I'm doing, I'm just going in and just marking out roughly kind of where does that basic level of light exist. So it's in this space, definitely. Here. I'm not going to make a complete mess of it. But it's really just putting down right. That's kind of that basic light level. Notice, I'm going to take that bit out actually. I want to keep that different because I know there's a light source going in there. So that's that light level. I said it gets brighter, didn't I? So I'm going to leave these at 50. And then I'm thinking, well, okay, what's the next stage? Well, the next stage really is this area just here. So this one. And then its counterpart over this side. So this one here. Now this is an interesting shape because it starts very close to the light and then gets further away from it. So I think what I'd probably do in this space is I'd eyedropper one of the higher values. So so that's my middle, so I've gone 2 up. Go back to my brush tool. I'm going to use a smooth brush this time. And I'm just going to put in some slightly higher values here. I can tell you straight away that's too high. So I'm going to go down 1. Put in that, and then I know it's going to get darker as it gets further away. So now I'm going to put in this slightly, maybe 1 down actually. You don't want to get too carried away with it too early on. So what this is really just exploring the ideas, just sort of thinking to myself, okay, roughly, kind of what does this look like? How is this actually going to work? Yeah, how is this going to work for me? Okay. And then here, so let's get rid of this area. So now I'll start to think about like this shape here. Now this is a really interesting one actually, because I haven't done this session with you guys about light bleeds. So light bleeds around objects. Okay, it doesn't just absorb them whole; it bleeds around them. Now, what that means is that sometimes the light can behave in multiple ways. So what I want to do is I actually want to paint this bit here really dark. Now, the reason I want to paint it really dark is because my light source on a z-axis is actually behind it. It's a little bit further back. So that says that the front of this sphere would be cast in shadow, right? Yeah, because the light's behind it, so it creates a silhouette. But actually what's going to happen in this space is the light here is so strong, so the light that's emanating from this space that's behind, is technically a little bit further back than this ring. The light that emanates is so strong that it's going to bleed over the top. So you're going to get a really kind of interesting light behavior. So it's going to be something more like, so I've made it dark, and then what I'll probably do is go up 1, or go up 2 even. So go up to quite light. Let's go into the... Make sure it's really soft. What I'm going to do is I'm slowly going to bring in, let's get rid of that. I slowly want to bring in just a bit of lightness. Okay? Not too much. You overdo it and it just won't work. But basically what's happening there, there we go. So you can, I don't know how, it doesn't really translate too well up on that screen. What's happening, if I zoom in, can you see how that's naturally started to create a gradient? Even though I made that all the same value, it's now lighter here, wherever you are. So it's lighter in this section at the bottom of the arc than it is at the top. Yeah, so I'm just thinking about kind of that bleed and the way that light kind of behaves together. So this is my first pass kind of done. Now I need to do my second pass. So what my second pass basically means, I now need to go in and start thinking about, okay, what does this actually look like in more detail? So if I zoom right out, if I take my my notes off, you'll see this is just a bunch of messy old smudges. There you go. But actually, it's quite a clear identity. It says, here's the lightest part, here's the darkest part, here are the bits where there's going to be some kind of gradient, and now I can go in with an actual brush and using those same values, start to paint in the details based on the surface. So this is the generic light build of light in the middle, dark all towards the edges, and then I've got that kind of ring that's kind of enveloping the light source. That's just those basic builds. Now I can look at it and go, all right, what is this material actually made of? Because that will define how I paint it. And I will do that without any lasso tool, just do that with a brush and just start painting in darker patches and lighter patches. Now the Munsell value scale, those 10 points up here, and those 10, they're great for doing this, for just mapping out the basics. This is the dark bit, this is the light bit, this is the middle bit. They don't work for detail painting. So what you need to do instead is to start using the grayscale slider. Right? Use the grayscale slider to find the right light levels to start painting in. But what I want you to do is I want you to start painting this in with as accurate a light construction as you can. Think about it logically. Where is the light? How is it behaving? It doesn't matter if it's ugly because this works like we talked about last week in passes. Yeah, we go over it and we go over it and we go over it until it starts to clean itself up. Right? And that's what I'm going to do now. So we're going to about half an hour, just under half an hour, where all I want you to do is just think about light. Where are the dark bits? Where are the light bits? And just add them in one piece at a time. All right? If you want to keep a good eye on it, just a little trick for you. You don't have to do this, but sometimes it helps. Is you can pull this out as a window, and then where is it? Arrange. So yeah, what I did there is this was sitting in this window, yeah, as most Photoshop files do. But what you can do is if you pull this out, so it hovers and it floats in the middle, like so, and then go up to Window, and then go Arrange, and then at the bottom this says New Window for. That's the wrong one. So let's go back to Coven. There's Coven. So pull Coven out so it exists on its own. Then go Window, Arrange, and New Window for Coven. And what that basically does is it gives you. There we go. Gives you multiple windows for the same file. And I know you're probably thinking, what on earth are you doing, Dan? Why would I need that? The reason this can be useful is because what it allows you to do is have like a little mini version of your file. So you can have a version of it that sits like that, and then another version that you're working on. So this one here, that you can actually now start painting into. Yeah, so this one you can start painting into, and up here you can see like the preview of what that looks like at the end. And it's a great way to work. It's one of the ways I prefer to work. But I tend to use two screens just because I've got like obviously a Cintiq and I use an iMac. But it's one way to work. It's just one way to do it. So you can have that kind of zoomed in. And it lets you. So yeah, you can kind of work on one and see the other there. So work on the details, but still see like that thumbnail view of it if you want to. Right. So just under 30 minutes. All I want you to keep your sketch layer visible because it's really handy. Just keep that rough one there. And then just start that process of kind of painting in those details in light. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to use kind of a few different brushes. And then we'll just, we'll see what they kind of look like at the end, but just don't rush it. Rush. And this is the point as well where you can start to actually clean up the lines, to actually get some real kind of sense to it. So, for example, down here I can start thinking about like, well, I want some like rough patches and some kind of rough areas. So I'll start to sort of paint those in. Like those shadows, those little patches. And down here, something like that. I'm going to start kind of bringing in some approximate shapes. And start trying to find the areas where the light's just not really reaching. Start bringing those in. This area just here. Up a little bit. Yeah, so I've got these dark circles as well, so I need to start working on these, bringing these in. This one there. I'm just doing a combination of like lassoing stuff. So isolating one area and going, okay, that's what that is, and now I'll make it lighter or darker based on whatever I just talked about. So, let's wait for this to fill out. Restart my Photoshop, it's not great. Right, just got another couple of minutes, folks. We are running out of time. Right, folks, can you just stop where you are for the moment? I want to just show you some stuff very, very quickly. We are running out of time. Yes, there he is. Yeah, time is running out, but you should be nearing a point where you can start to see the painting. Okay, it's starting to make sense. It's starting to have a kind of more realistic sense of depth to it, an understanding of, maybe not going to have the details in it yet, but an understanding of where the details will be. You know, that you've got a plan that is rounded to the point where you can really start to see where you're going to drop in some cool stuff and where you're going to drop in things that will kind of add to the narrative, yeah, and add to the kind of the theme and the feeling of what it is you're creating. And that's fine. I mean, you have only been doing this, you've only been working on this painting for 2 hours and 20 minutes, roughly. To do the light work, so to do the light study, I would normally give myself about 5 hours, maybe 6, for something this kind of size. To do the painting on top of it, maybe 20 in addition to that, to get to that kind of end point. All right, so don't think that this is a fast process, or there's any like shortcuts. There really aren't. It's really about just planning it and working through the process and beginning to build the identity of what it is you're creating. And hopefully you can see how it will start to translate into a finished piece. The problem you might find, and I have the reason I bring it up because I have this problem myself, is every time while you're working, you're thinking of new ideas. What if I put this here, or if I move that there, or maybe I don't like that after all, or maybe I should move this on, and you start to rethink yourself, and that's fine, but make clear decisions about what you're doing. So if you do decide to move something, move it, and then don't move it again. Yeah, move it back. If you move it and go, whoa, bad idea, move it back. But don't start flying things around the canvas, hoping that eventually it will land on the spot where it starts to look okay and it starts to make sense. Okay, because that's just not going to happen. All right, so you need to take your time, slowly build up that content, slowly start to make sense with it, and it will work. And I think one of the things that I found when I was starting to learn digital painting techniques, and I still find it now, is you expect things to be faster than they are. Like sometimes we lose sight of the fact that just because it's digital, it's supposed to be quicker, just because you're not using paint, and actually it's just not true. The process is the same, more or less. So yeah, keep kind of building through this, keep adding those layers, and I'm hoping, even if I zoom out, actually, if we come out of it, where are we? Yeah, you know what? As a thumbnail, it's starting to work. There's some stuff I don't like. I don't like my archways at the back are kind of like rounded and not rounded at the same time. Like obviously the tops are curved, but the shape of them on the composition doesn't know if it's straight or curved. So I need to decide what I'm doing there. I think I'm going to make it straight. I think it will work straight because it makes the circle more circular if there's a straight line behind it. So there's little things like that. Obviously my guy in the foreground, he's not posed as well, he's just occupying space. So I need to do something with that character to make them a little bit more viable. And then obviously I've got to paint in so much rendered detail in terms of like light and stuff. Not just light, but like the props, the honeycomb effect hasn't been painted in yet. But it's getting there, it's starting to make sense. So in another 2 hours, it will probably get to the point where I can then use it, and I emphasize this, use it as reference for the painting. I know for a fact that some of you know how to turn this into like the underlayer to then just add a bunch of local color over the top. Don't do that, because it doesn't look good. It just looks like you've used this as an underlayer and put a bunch of local color over the top. All right, so we will use this as a reference to then start painting. And when we do the color session, we'll really go into what is the actual relationship between color and light, and how do we start painting with just straight in with color. So with our color sessions, we're not doing any line work. We're going like color to paper and just build, paper, color to canvas and building a painting without that line work. So just using shapes and stuff. But hopefully it's going to give you a good idea to start thinking about light, think three-dimensionally, think about the depth, think about the relationships between objects. Yeah? If I've got that heavy light source there, what happens to that over time, and what can I do to make the surface around it feel textured as opposed to flat? Yeah, why is a gradient ineffective against adding little different types of marks and different types of scratches? Why do I want to move shapes around in weird ways? Why would I want to have some objects going in one direction, some going in another? Yeah, how do I make sure that my audience starts and ends their image, starts and ends their view in the same way? I know I've kind of briefly mentioned this guy's stuff before, but I thought I'd quickly bring up his work again, just so you can see some of this stuff in full effect. This is Jacob Rosalski, very, very talented digital painter, has done lots of different kind of themes, possibly the best Christmas card cover ever. But he's very, very good at working with rough shapes and bringing them to life. Working very carefully to slowly bring a composition to life. So he's a very good example of an artist to look at. If you're ever wondering, how do I actually tell a story in a painting, and how do I use color and light and shape together? He's well worth checking out. Very, very talented artist. I'm very good at that idea of studies in just light. Let's see if I can find something that's very light based. That's a good one. So these are interesting, the way he's using light. He's thinking about how he's got this really dark foreground and very light background, and then fades objects against them, and then using those super dark colours. So notice how, because the light here is really bright at the back of the image, it means that actually the characters in the foreground or in the midground are effectively cast into shadow. They're quite sharp silhouettes. Yeah, hasn't got much kind of occlusion. Much diffusion going on. So they must be made of metal, kind of relatively smooth shapes in order to get those crisp outlines. But then he's also done some really nice, clever touches with high value areas, just to really make make those subjects stand out. So he's really, very, very talented painter. Well worth taking a look at his stuff, even if it's just to not so much style. Don't think about subject matter in terms of whether or not to be inspired by someone. Sometimes subject matter really isn't important, actually, and what you should look at is their understanding of fundamentals. And that's a great example of, a really firm understanding of fundamental painting. This is all Photoshop, this is all digital stuff, but again, high value, you've got high value areas, low value areas that stand out against them. He's made some clear decisions about saturation as well, which we'll talk about in the colour session. It's got desaturation to show distance. That's how we know that object's a giant, because it's slightly desaturated. It implies it's quite a way into the distance. There's lots of really cool techniques that this artist used. So go between now and the next session, go and check him out. What I would like you to do though, you've got a homework task between now and session number 3. The first task, is can you finish one of these as a light study? And I mean in as much, not done until you think it looks okay, until that you cannot understand how to possibly add more detail. Get as much into it as you can. Go right down to the little tiny details, the tiny props. Okay, there's a reason why I gave you 5,000 by 5,000 pixels to work with. Zoom in, go into the details of your composition and start to think about the light, how light affects certain pieces of clothing, how it might affect the flooring, or objects in the background. So get as much detail in. That's your first task. And then your second task is I would like you to bring to the colour session. I want you to bring a colour palette of 5 colours. That's it. Don't care what colours. Don't care how they make you feel or anything like that. I want you to just bring me your 5 colours. Okay, because that's what we're going to start to look at, and I'm going to help. We're going to start to unpick the science of colour, but also how we use colour correctly and incorrectly. And that's it. We're all kind of done. So make sure you save your work. Please try and work. I know you've got a million other things to do, but this is a massive problem-solving exercise. The longer you spend on it, the better you'll get at solving these problems. Yeah, it really is like an athletic process. The more you train, the better you get. All right, so yeah, save your work. Yeah, you guys can kind of head off or keep painting if you want to, and then we will pick this up next week.